What is going on, everybody? Enzo here, and you can tell that today's video title is slightly different from the types of video content I've been making on this channel, but I feel like when we're covering games to such extensive lengths, especially in the Final Fantasy franchises, I feel like these kinds of videos are almost a staple to have, and they always make for good conversation starters, especially because of a game like Final Fantasy X, which has so many story elements and game design elements that really help shape to why it has become such a mainstay of the franchise. So as someone who plays a lot of RPG games, I find that music helps with really setting the tone, the ambiance, and the tune that the game is going to have throughout its storyline. If you play a game and the music is something that resonates with you, and it's something that you even take outside of the game itself and you start listening to it sort of in your everyday lives, whether you're studying, going to the gym, going for a drive, etc., then I feel like that speaks a lot about how much of an impact that music really has to you. And for many of us, we have played Final Fantasy X pretty much when we were young. So when it came out as a remaster, and I'm pretty sure a lot of us are still playing it to this day in 2025 when this is being recorded, then it really does speak volumes as to how much of an impact both emotionally and as a gameplay experience this game had on all of us. So for today's video, I will be giving you my list of my top 5 soundtracks from Final Fantasy X, and keep in mind that this will be in no particular order. When I came up with this list, this actually took me a while to do because I was considering every single soundtrack that this game had and how it impacted me in different ways, but I also wanted to consider at what point that it was playing throughout the story and basing it off of that. It sounds like it's a lot, but in all reality, it's not so much. Obviously, a lot of you in the comment section are going to be like, how come this soundtrack's not included? Chances are I probably considered it, but at the end of the day, I could only pick 5. So I'm going to go with my top 5 OSTs from Final Fantasy X. Let's dive right into it. And if you're enjoying this kind of content, please consider subscribing to the channel so I know to make more top 5 lists, not just for Final Fantasy X, but also for other games as well. And leave comments below on what ideas you guys think I should do for these kinds of videos. So the first soundtrack that almost came immediately into my mind when I was thinking of this list, maybe that could be an argument as to my #1 favorite soundtrack from this game of all time. It is Servants from the Mountain. This is Mount Gagazet's theme. It probably just resonated with me because, again, I'm from Canada. We experience snow and cold quite a bit here. And this soundtrack, when you're walking about in the snow, really feels like you're actually on Mount Gagazet, immersing yourself with the culture of the Ronso and the nature of the mountain itself. And the events that actually take place in Mount Gagazet were a little bit more sadder, so this having a very melancholy, somber type of, but at the same time very relaxing soundtrack was almost perfect. You had Seymour, who was chasing the party, and along the way, of course this wasn't shown, but he destroyed almost the entire Ronso tribe to get here. Biran and Yankee were killed by him. Same with Maester Kelk Ronso and a majority of the Ronso except for a few that were in hiding when this event happened. Obviously, he made his way to the party when he got to the peak of Mount Gagazet, or close to the peak, but he ended up losing to them as Seymour Flux, and of course he went to try again one more time and lost in Inside Sin. But I think just in a combination of the setting that this music took place in and all the events that happened in it, and the fact that I'm still actually listening to it, this is actually one of my study music. So whenever I'm studying or I'm like coming up with new lore ideas or writing scripts, I listen to the soundtrack quite a bit. So this is definitely up there on my top 5 list. The second soundtrack on this top 5 list, this is actually one that both me and my sister agreed that we really liked. My sister doesn't play Final Fantasy X, but she has heard the soundtracks that I've been listening to it. And this was the one that stood out to her. I didn't ask her for her reasons, unfortunately. Maybe I should have. I think she was just going off of the sound itself as opposed to where it's actually taking place. This is Besaid Island's theme. This one is a lot more luscious, green, almost isolated area, free from the stress and the corruption, I suppose you could call, of Yevon and the politics, because it's so far south that almost no one wants to pay attention to it. Of course, there is a temple of Yevon on Besaid village, but apart from that, people are just sort of living their lives, and it's just a nice, beautiful, peaceful little place in Spira. I think it's very different, but also it has that very upright, smooth, relaxed tone, almost similar to the approach behind the Servants of the Mountain. But of course, because the setting is a lot more happier compared to Mount Gagazet, then it fits just fine. And once again, this also falls in my study music, so whenever I'm studying, working on something, I will have this soundtrack up. That doesn't necessarily apply to all of these soundtracks, by the way, but like I said, the fact that it resonates with me outside of the game and I listen to it when I do other things in my personal life, then it pretty much speaks volumes as to how good this soundtrack really is. The third coming on this list is the soundtrack that plays in the Omega Ruins. Now it isn't the only time that it gets played. I believe it also gets played in the Al Bhed airship at some point during the story, but I know it more from the Omega Ruins. And just that nice little soft piano beat just sounds, this one I'm going purely off of sound. This is not one that I usually listen to outside of the game, but it still has that nice, cool, relaxing sound. You guys have also heard it used in some of my lore videos. I'll put this as a background music just because it has that nice, curious little tone. I'll be honest, these words I'm using to describe the music, I'm not sure if you guys understand or even agree with me, but this is sort of what I think when I listen to these soundtracks, so that's why I'm going off of it. So this would make it the third spot on my top 5 favorite soundtracks from Final Fantasy X. It is a soundtrack from Omega Ruins. These soundtracks will be playing as I talk about them, so you guys will definitely be hearing the soundtracks as I sort of go through it. I'm not listening to them right now, I'm just going off of memory and sort of how I felt when I was playing this game, especially when I was younger, especially because it's been 20 years since this, well, way more than 20 years since this game came out, almost 2001. 24 years, that's a lot. This next soundtrack, it is the theme that plays when the party invades the Bevel wedding between Seymour and Yuna. It is called Assault, I should say. And I like this one because it's very nice, uplifting, upbeating. I think because of all of the pain that Yuna has gone through, the fact that the party is trying to save her, and they also just came off of a very tough battle and a tough escape over at their Al Bhed home in Bikanal Island, where they were invaded by the Guado. So having sort of that nice uplifting, upbeating tone after they discovered where Yuna is, so they could go and rescue her. And of course the scene where they were making their way down from the airship to the temple to stop the wedding. The wedding, I think, was one of the really good moments out of this game in terms of it being nice, uplifting in a game full of sorrow, death, and pain. So I think this is a really good way of reversing the tone of the story to a more positive one, and I think this soundtrack did a really good job of reflecting that. And of course, the Bevel wedding scene I think is pretty iconic in the game of Final Fantasy X, which is why to me this song stood out pretty well. This is not a song I use outside of playing the game. I don't use it as a gym soundtrack music, but I like the impact that it did in the game, which is why I'm putting it on this list. And coming in at number 5, well, the last of my top 5 soundtracks from this game is the battle music that plays when we fight Yunalesca. Now, I'm surprised I didn't have more battle soundtracks in here. I will say right now, one of my top favorable honorable mentions for this kind of video was actually Seymour's Ambition, which is the soundtrack that plays when you fight against Seymour at Makalania Temple. That was really up there. That is the soundtrack I actually use when I need ambience music for dark, mysterious segments during my D&D sessions. I would play Seymour's Ambition, but I feel like because it didn't sort of resonate with me as much as these other soundtracks did for different reasons, I could not put it there. Not to mention I can only do 5, but in reality, all of the soundtracks in Final Fantasy X had their impacts in one way or another. I think what really stood out to me with Challengers was how long I was hearing it for, because I was having so much trouble fighting Yunalesca the first time I actually took her on. That was before I fully understood what the zombie status did in terms of its benefits and its consequences. The fact that death and mega death don't work on you when you're zombified, obviously that kind of took me off guard because it was like a big shock factor when you first fight Yunalesca. But I think with that music playing in the background, and of course that is sort of the turning point in the story where the party realizes that the final summoning isn't a permanent solution to Sin's downfall, so they sort of made the resolve, especially after with the help of Orin, who didn't want to go through that same situation as he did 10 years ago with Braska, with Tidus, who comes from an outside world, from Dream Zanarkand, who wasn't falling influence into the Yevon religion, and Riku, who is an Al Bhed, so she obviously doesn't give a crap about the Yevon religion, whereas everyone else in the party also kind of started shifting their viewpoints. Waka was the most reluctant to do it because he was such a devout follower of Yevon up until that point, but eventually he decided to side with his friend and take on Yunalesca. So I think that turning point of fighting against Yunalesca and taking down the status quo to establish a new one in Sphera, I think was a really big turning point in this story, and the fact that this music represented it by when they took on Yunalesca was really big, and it resonated with me from a story point aspect, which is why it made it onto this list. This music also plays a couple more times with a couple of the Dark no, not a couple, I think it's just on Dark Bakhmut, and it also plays during the fight against Omega in the Omega Ruins, so it has been the background music for some pretty strong boss fights. I don't think I have used it as a soundtrack for my lore videos, just because my lore videos don't have a real need to have that strong upbeat soundtrack like the way Challengers does it. I like to use more ambient, calmer music, so like Servants of the Mountain and the Besaid Island soundtrack I will use, not so much for Challengers. And that's going to do it for my top 5 soundtracks from Final Fantasy X. Let me know what you guys thought of it, what your list looks like. You don't have to order it because I necessarily didn't, I just went sort of down the list. And other than that, let me know what other ideas you guys may have for top 5s in the comment section below. Leave this video a like if you enjoyed, and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more Final Fantasy content. Other than that, this is Enzo signing out, and that, as they say, is that.